At noon on Wednesday, January 6, 2021, then-President Donald Trump took the stage at the so-called Save America march and rally in Washington, D.C., near the White House. He declared, "We will never give up. We will never concede." Soon, as crowds began to gather outside the U.S. Capitol building, a group of spectators at the Trump speech started marching to the Capitol, chanting and waving flags. At 1 p.m., the group of protesters outside the Capitol building stormed the outer police barrier. At 1:05, inside the Capitol building, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi bangs the gavel to call the joint session of Congress to order. Their task that day? Certify the election results and confirm Joe Biden as the next president of the United States. Inside the House chambers, Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona and Senator Ted Cruz of Texas rise to object to the counting of their electoral ballots. The House and Senate split to deliberate in separate parts of the Capitol building. At 1:30 p.m., on the steps at the back of the Capitol building, protesters overcome Capitol police officers and the mob breaks through the final police barricades. Inside the Capitol, lawmakers are unaware of the mayhem outside. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell takes the Senate floor saying, "Voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever." Around this same time, suspicious packages are found at the Republican and Democratic National Committee headquarters elsewhere in D.C., and nearby buildings are evacuated. The packages are later confirmed to be pipe bombs. Shortly after 2 p.m., the mob breaches the Capitol building, breaking into windows and climbing in to open doors for others to follow. The Secret Service enter the chambers and remove Pence and Pelosi from the floor of the Senate and House. The Senate and House are called to recess and the building goes into lockdown. Trump tweets, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution." Representatives on the House floor are instructed to put on the gas masks kept under their seats. Shortly before 3 p.m., rioters breach the Senate chamber, jumping from the balcony to the floor below, climbing onto the podium, rifling through papers, and taking selfies and pictures that would later be used to indict them. At 3:11 p.m., a group of rioters overwhelm Capitol police officers in front of the Speaker's lobby, where lawmakers are sheltered, breaking windows and trying to force their way in. A Capitol police officer shoots Ashley Babbitt as she tries to force her way through the doors, fatally wounding her. At 3:36 p.m., more than 2 hours after protesters breached the Capitol grounds, Trump orders the National Guard to the Capitol. At 4:17 p.m., Trump tweets a video to his millions of Twitter followers saying, "I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You've seen the way others are treated. I know how you feel." He tweets again at 6:01 p.m. "These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. Go home with love and in peace. Remember this day forever." The January 6th insurrection on the U.S. Capitol building was unprecedented in the history of this country, spurred on by a power-hungry, lame duck president who used his own platforms as well as his connections to right-wing media and conspiracy theorists to whip his base into a frenzy, largely through spreading the categorically false narrative that the election had been stolen, and he, President Trump, was the rightful president-elect, and that allowing Joe Biden to be sworn in would lead to the mass curbs on the rights and privileges that his base held so dear. Despite the fact that every major news outlet confirmed that Joe Biden was the rightful winner of the 2020 presidential election, including Fox News eventually after the threat of litigation, and regularly debunked the disinformation spreading about fraud and a stolen election, hundreds of thousands of people in the United States have been convinced that the election was stolen. Hundreds of them believed it so fervently that it was worth risking their lives and for many their freedom over. How did we get here? What is it about America or American conservatives that makes this country so susceptible to believing in fake news and disinformation? Is it just conservatives who fall for this? Is it just America that suffers from a large swath of its population believing in conspiracies that have been widely debunked? And is there a way out? I set out to find the answer to these questions, and what I found might surprise you. This is why Americans fall for fake news. Roll the intro. I'm super excited about my partner for today's video, 𝗓𝗓𝗡𝗧. I love Coffee. Trade connects you to the best roasters in the country so you can discover great coffee to brew at home. They have over 450 different coffees, from dark roasts to blends to rare roasts to decaf and everything in between, so you'll be sure to find something you absolutely love. Trade recently sent me Sparrow's Coffee Decaf Columbia Roast. I'm a decaf girly lately, but I still love the taste of coffee, and we deserve amazing coffee too. Can we also pause and admire how cute the packaging is on this coffee though? And it tastes great. Very nutty and delicious. Trade's matching algorithm will curate your perfect next cup as well. And they have flexible subscription plans, so you can pick what fits your lifestyle and tastes all in one. And this stuff is roasted fresh to order, either pre-ground or whole bean, so you know you're getting the freshest possible coffee. Plus, it comes shipped right to your door, and you know I love a convenient moment. So what are you even waiting for? Click my link below or go to drinktrade.com/Leeja and get a free bag of coffee with any subscription. Thanks, Trade. The January 6th insurrection was the culmination of many disparate issues coming to fruition and years of disinformation and fake news campaigns slowly building into a fever pitch, leading hundreds of people to believe that storming the Capitol was a valid means of handling what they saw as a very real threat to democracy. Turns out, however, that the disinformation itself and the erosion of trust in the democratic process are the real threats to this country. But how did we get here, and how can we combat it? Fake news, disinformation, and propaganda are not new. We have seen them used for centuries to influence populations and achieve different ends. I use fake news, disinformation, and propaganda pretty interchangeably, though they do have slightly different definitions. Disinformation is incorrect information that is spread to purposely mislead people. Fake news is disinformation that is spread as though it is true, generally through the news media or via outlets that are meant to look like credible news sources. And the word propaganda has its origins in the Catholic Church, specifically in 1622, as part of the Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Church created the Congratio de Propaganda Fide, or the Congregation for Propagating the Faith, informally known as propaganda, aimed at propagating the Catholic faith in non-Catholic countries. The term took on a secular and negative connotation in the mid-19th century when it started being used in the political sphere, arguably peaking in the US in the 1950s during the Red Scare and fear of communist propaganda infiltrating the lives of everyday Americans. Even in 1925, Harper's Magazine was publishing articles in which writers were wringing their hands over the threat that fake news posed to democracy in America. By the 1960s, television news outlets brought the daily news into Americans' living rooms. However, the options for consuming news were limited, and most Americans consumed the same news. While different Americans interpreted the news differently and considered different solutions to the day's problems to be better than others, they generally all agreed on what the problems were, and only very fringe groups questioned the veracity of the majority of what the news media purported to be fact. At the same time, the United States began to see the growth of hot-button issues being used to unify members within each of the two parties. The civil rights movement in the 1960s forced much of America to confront the injustices of overt racism, an uncomfortable exercise for those who exacted the most control and benefited from the racist systems, and a reckoning that some Americans have still not recovered from. In the 1970s, we see the abortion issue come to a head in Roe v. Wade, giving the right a galvanizing issue to coalesce around. With the founding of the moral majority came the increased reach of the religious right into politics and the use of wedge issues like abortion, gay rights, and other hot-button topics to whip the conservative base into a frenzy so they would show up and vote in higher numbers. See my videos on Ronald Reagan and on why conservatives are obsessed with trans kids from the past couple weeks. This increased use of specific issues as galvanizing forces led to further partisanship, as members of each party began identifying specific stances on those issues as attached to one or the other parties. For example, before Roe v. Wade, members within both parties were both in favor of and against abortion in relatively equal measure. Your party affiliation didn't necessarily determine your stance on abortion. Afterwards, abortion became a wedge issue exploited by the the religious right, wherein if you were a Republican, the general consensus was that you were against abortion. And if you were in favor of abortion, maybe you weren't a real Republican. This led to increased divide amongst Americans along party lines, unifying members of each party and driving them further apart, and turning members of the opposite party into social others, into near aliens whose views and beliefs were incomprehensible to members of the opposing party. And that partisanship has increased through a number of forces to where now members of each party often live drastically different lives, from where they live, to the media they consume, to the establishments they frequent, to the jobs they work. When two groups lead such disparate lives, hinging on fundamental disagreements about hot-button social issues, it becomes a lot easier to demonize the other group, something that politicians and purveyors of news content can capitalize on. And nothing has capitalized on or grown this division more than the creation of the internet. Before the internet, people generally consumed similar news media. Everyone agreed on what the issues of the day were, even if they didn't agree as to their solutions. And other than the religious right, radical fringe groups were largely siloed due to the limitations of communication and community building in the pre-internet world. With the invention of the internet, everything changed. Information could be spread at an unprecedented speed. Communities could form made up of people who otherwise would be alone and isolated in their extremist beliefs. Anyone could write anything and pass it off as fact. Any asshole could make a video and claim that what they say in it is true. Hi, I'm the asshole. And then social media saw what the internet was doing and said, hold my beer, and came in and blew your dad's AOL chat rooms out of the water. Now we have algorithms spoon-feeding us exactly what we want to see, and that's only amplified what was already happening before the internet age. Now the information being published by fringe groups and websites passing themselves off as legitimate information could be disseminated in millions of tweets, shared millions of times on Facebook, and get in front of more people faster than anyone would have time to fact check or control. And social media capitalizes on pre-existing cognitive biases that exist in people, playing on preconceived notions, strongly held convictions, and emotional reactions in order to do what it was designed to do. Maximize engagement. Keep people swiping and watching and clicking and commenting on the platform for as long as humanly possible. And what gets the most engagement? Sensational content, specifically negative sensational content, and content that confirms your pre-existing beliefs. No one wants to be told they're wrong, so people are much more likely to share content that reinforces what they already think. And when fake news is everywhere, you could read one fake news article that reinforces your suspicions, like maybe that the system doesn't work for you and there's injustice all around, for example. And then when you see that same disinformation shared on social media, you're more likely to reshare that because it's negative, sensational, and confirms your beliefs. And while other countries do deal with disinformation sharing on a large scale, nowhere does it seem more prevalent than in the United States. Part of the reason for this is our strong divisions, sown over years and years by political actors like the moral majority, benefiting from pushing wedge issues to get votes and gain control. These divisions create a higher emotional stake and cause us to identify with our party affiliation on a deep personal level, seeing our beliefs as translating to us being inherently moral, good people. And when beliefs are that deeply personalized, you will more likely share an article that reinforces those beliefs and those identities, not so much to share the information contained in that article, as to signal to others your type, where you fit, what you believe in, and which group you belong to. Because of this, the veracity of the information in the article itself becomes secondary to the act of sharing the article to signal your affiliation, allowing disinformation to spread more rapidly. And we generally are much worse at identifying disinformation than we think. An overwhelming proportion of Americans, when surveyed, believe that disinformation is a major issue affecting our democracy. At the same time, as many as 3 in 4 Americans Americans overestimate their ability to spot fake news. And those that self-identify as more partisan, leaning more towards the extremes of either party, tend to be more confident in their knowledge of the political issues and are actually more likely to share disinformation because of this. About 90% of research participants told researchers they believed that they were above average in their ability to sniff out fake news. While so many people purport to be concerned about the prevalence of fake news, relatively few indicate having ever seen or shared it. That math ain't mathin', friends. However, this is not an equal partisan split. Republicans who consider themselves further to the right tend to be much more likely to spread disinformation through social media sharing than Democrats who consider themselves farther to the left. A recent Politico study identified these individuals as low conscientiousness conservatives, or LCCs for short. These low conscientiousness conservatives are conservative and fall on the low end of conscientiousness, defined by the study as the tendency to regulate one's own behavior by being less impulsive and more orderly, diligent, and prudent. So there are low conscientiousness liberals, high conscientiousness liberals, high conscientiousness conservatives, and low conscientiousness conservatives. And of those four groups, low conscientiousness conservatives, or LCCs, were far more likely to believe in and share fake news and disinformation. The only factor that this study was able to determine as the reason for why LCCs were so much more likely to share fake news was their specific proclivity for chaos, which the study defined as a motivation to disregard, disrupt, and take down existing social and political institutions as a means of asserting the dominance and superiority of one's own group. Indeed, multiple other studies have confirmed that conservatives have a lower ability to distinguish truths and falsehoods. This is due in part to the fact that a vast majority of the disinformation out there tends to reinforce conservative ideologies, while the corresponding truths tend to favor liberal viewpoints. But this can also be explained by the fact that conservatives tend to generally be less trusting of established institutions, news media, and democracy itself. And with the growth in partisan siloing, meaning the lives of Republicans and Democrats look vastly different, comes the growth in one very significant factor. Liberals tend to go to school for longer than conservatives. Education level is another factor that strongly predicts whether an individual is able to distinguish between fact and fiction. But this truth that liberals tend to be better educated than conservatives also reinforces another commonly held right-wing belief, that elites and academics are controlling the narrative and can't be trusted. And their distrust of academics and elites makes sense, because partisanship has led to severe distrust in the other side, because we've internalized our politics to the point of them becoming personal identifiers of morals and worldviews, and the vast majority of people in academic and research institutions are liberals, because liberals are the ones obtaining higher education at a larger rate. So their distrust is self-reinforcing and also indicative of their ability to distinguish facts from fake news, leading to a self-perpetuating cycle that seems impossible to stop. How do you convince a group of people to believe facts when those facts were discovered by academics who tend on average to skew liberal and are therefore the enemy, and according to conservatives probably bought out by Big Pharma or George Soros or something? On top of this, the past 7 years have seen the accumulation of multiple different events that culminated in the perfect storm that led to January 6th and the stolen election conspiracy theory. Donald Trump was elected president in 2016, as if any of us could forget. And with his election came a president who was quick to share whatever information, whether true or false, furthered his cause or increased his power. We also had a president with an unprecedented connection to the news media, specifically Fox News, and fringe far-right newspapers and fake news creators like Steve Bannon. A president who regularly called in to Fox and Friends and made wild statements that had no basis in fact or reality, knowing that Fox had a direct line to his base and would do very little to fact-check him or really stop him from doing and saying whatever he wanted. Add to that a global pandemic, which left people feeling isolated, afraid, confused, and looking for answers, and we have a perfect storm wherein disinformation can spread. And we saw this first with the pandemic itself, leading to what the CDC termed an infodemic, where so much information is available and being spread online that it crowds out the information that the experts in the field are trying to communicate to the public, leading to widespread distrust in the authorities and experts and causing people to do drastic and risky things because because of that fear and distrust. So you have people injecting themselves with bleach and horse medicine because there's just so much disinformation floating around that the actual truth seems wrong to them, especially because the type of person willing to believe that ingesting bleach is medically a good idea is also probably somebody who's a conservative with a low conscientiousness and a proclivity for chaos, making them the perfect consumer and purveyor of fake news. Along with this infodemic and the election of Donald Trump, arguably the most populist politician who's ever taken the White House, you have a general erosion of public trust in democracy itself. Plus, the very point of populism and a populist politician is to have followers of the populist politician, in this case Donald Trump, believe in the strength and truth of that central person at the expense of belief in the system. Studies have shown that populism erodes democracy by requiring belief in the person or the nation, not based around specific issues or communities, but based around an organic, undefined version of the nation state. Like, make America great again. How? It's unclear, but if you don't believe in that statement, can you really call yourself a true American, a true patriot? Because another way that populism thrives is through the unquestioning adherence to belief in that nation and in that person, so that if you are not with us, then you're against us. Populist leaders further erode trust in democracy by questioning the establishment, the media, and the elites, a theme we've already talked about, and that was the central touchstone of the Trump presidency. According to Stanford's Global Populisms Project, among most dangerous of populism's consequences is the erosion of formal democratic rules and liberal institutions. These destructive effects of populist rule include the takeover and taming of courts and oversight institutions, and new laws that limit the freedom of the media and civil society. These legal and formal maneuvers erode public criticism, transparency, and accountability. Just as importantly, however, such governments have also made a point of undermining informal democratic norms, such as conflict of interest laws, financial transparency, or respect for opposition. Here, the damage may go deeper and be far less reversible. Such norms and informal rules are the product of decades of elite and popular interactions. Once such trust and consensus disappears, it is not easy to bring it back. And with all of this, the Trump presidency and the chaos of the pandemic, the election denial and eventual January 6th insurrection becomes a very clear and obvious outcome. For months before the election, Donald Trump made comments to his supporters that reinforced the notion that the democratic election process can't be trusted. In April 2020, he claimed that mail-in ballots are a very dangerous thing for this country, saying they're fraudulent in many cases. In reality, mail-in ballots have been used successfully in several states for years with very few instances of fraud. In fact, Trump himself has voted by mail before. And because Trump was a populist president who required full loyalty from his staff and supporters, they followed suit. In June, then Attorney General William Barr began questioning mail-in ballots, claiming that they posed danger of counterfeiting, despite also acknowledging in an NPR interview that his claims had no basis in fact. Trump doubled down on the mail-in ballot narrative on Fox News, saying in July that mail-in voting is going to rig the election, indicating for the first time that he might not accept the results of the 2020 election if he were defeated. On election night, Trump claimed victory despite numerous swing states still counting ballots. Many of his supporters mobbed ballot counting sites in the days to come. Rudy Giuliani, despite saying in court where perjury is a thing that he was not alleging any election fraud happened, he made numerous statements out of court indicating that there was a wide voting fraud conspiracy afoot. At one point, at that infamous hair dye melting incident, he said, "I know crimes. I can smell them. You don't have to smell this one. I can prove it to you 18 different ways." He did not, however, prove it ever in even one way. And while major members of the Trump administration were giving the voting fraud argument the veneer of legitimacy, the big lie was further spread through disinformation campaigns on untrustworthy news sites and via social media. According to a study published by the Carter Center, Facebook served a vital role in spreading the election fraud lie. Specifically, disinformation repeat offenders, that is, media sources known to repeatedly publish disinformation, were critical in the proliferation of the big lie and other harmful election narratives. Repeat offenders most prominently featured included Fox News, Breitbart, The Daily Wire, The Gateway Pundit, and The Epoch Times. Disinformation repeat offender content appeared in 97% of right-leaning Facebook groups and accounted for 1 in 5 links shared in those groups. And the volume of repeat offender content content in right-leaning groups increased by 156% in the days between the election and the January 6th insurrection. The divisions and distrusts that have been sowed in this country for decades, combined with the power of the internet, created an atmosphere that was primed for the chaos brought by the January 6th insurrection. And it's still unclear what all of this might mean for the 2024 presidential election. My fear is that it's going to be 2020 redo between Biden and Trump, and either Trump will win and further validate his base of low conscientiousness conservatives, creating further ideological divides in this country that will only be exacerbated by disinformation online, or Biden will win and we'll have another January 6th on our hands, but this time they've had 4 more years to organize, galvanized by their ability to literally break into the Capitol and wreak havoc. Imagine if those people had been organized on the ground that day. This makes it all the more important that we think critically and take major steps to curb disinformation and fake news online. The good of our democracy depends on it. And studies have shown that simply debunking the conspiracies and disinformation is not enough. When someone's emotionally attached to a certain ideological belief and worldview, who considers themselves morally superior to others for their worldview, and who has had that worldview reinforced by, say, QAnon conspiracies, or has been told to use bleach to kill coronavirus because the CDC is infiltrated with liberal elites who are all bought out by big pharma and don't have your best interest at heart, so what else are you gonna do? And then that same information is repeated back to them a few times through various fake news outlets or from the President of the United States, it becomes very, very difficult to convince that person otherwise. And when that person already tends to distrust the world around them, including all experts and sources of reputable news, a simple debunking doesn't cut it. It's so much deeper than that. One way to help curb the flow of disinformation is to focus on teaching media literacy, especially in middle and high schools. Some organizations are working to make media literacy classes more available, and some schools are requiring media literacy to be taught in the classroom. For example, Illinois was the first state to require news literacy courses to be offered at every high school, and Colorado now requires media literacy standards in schools. And California passed a media literacy law in 2018 that requires the State Department of Education to make available to school districts web-based resources and instructional materials on media literacy. Other state intervention could also prove effective. In New Mexico, the Secretary of State has developed a website that provides fact checks for disinformation specific to elections in that state. And the North Carolina Board of Elections created a program called Mythbuster Monday, a series of posts debunking popular myths in North Carolina about local and national elections. And finally, social media platforms need to take on the task of doing more to regulate disinformation. And don't come at me with your free speech arguments, okay? Social media platforms are private entities. They can curb whatever speech they want. And for the good of democracy, they should. According to the Carter Center, ahead of future US elections, social media platforms must reform policies and actions to address repeat offenders grounded in human rights principles to preserve freedom of expression and mitigate real-world harms. Rather than blunt force interventions, e.g. blanket bans, that prompt accusations of censorship, platforms should establish clear policies and enforcement actions with an emphasis on providing context and creating friction that reduces the spread, reach, and impact of harmful content. Decisions about such reforms should be made in a collaborative manner with government, civil society, media, academia, and other experts weighing in on potential solutions. On an individual level, we can help stop the spread of disinformation by taking an extra beat before sharing that article or that Instagram post. After learning everything for this video today, it has me second guessing and taking a beat before I share things. Because as much as we can say, well, studies show conservatives are the ones that are worse about it, the reality is that liberals also share disinformation. And I think it's on all of us to care about what we're sharing instead of blindly reposting because it fits in with our worldview without reading through the information and making sure the source is reputable. We can increase our media literacy through courses online. PBS has a great collection of resources that are mostly for kids in high school, but frankly could benefit everyone to get the basics of understanding how to spot fake news. Again, studies show that people generally are overconfident in their ability to spot fake news, and we could all benefit from being more critical consumers of media. Teach your kids media literacy and talk to their school board about adding media literacy curriculum into their schools. Contact your representatives and talk to them about social media regulations and your concerns about fake news and disinformation and their effect on our democracy. It can feel very overwhelming and hopeless, but it's important to work towards the world that we want to see, because the alternative isn't an option. If you liked this video, you'll also like my last video all about why conservatives are obsessed with trans kids. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, especially my newest and royal patrons. And thank you especially to multi-platinum patron Brett Piontek. If you'd like personal content about my dog, show notes, and behind the scenes stuff, sign up over on Patreon using the link below. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye!